Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of Can We Still Be Friends, the podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. The new trailer for the Avengers: The Age of Ultron was recently released and is already setting records, so we thought we'd take the time to rewatch Joss Whedon's The Avengers from 2012. Ryan liked this one more than I did, and seems to enjoy superhero movies in general more than I do, so we thought we'd try to figure out the appeal of superhero movies. And if there's time, peer into that mysterious and beloved entity that is the Whedonverse, Joss Whedon's extensive collection of movies, TV shows, web series, and comic books that throw so many fanboys and girls into a tizzy.
The Avengers is one of the most successful movies ever in terms of box office, making over $1.5 billion worldwide. Critically, it was well received, especially for a summer blockbuster, earning a 92% certified fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So in not loving it, Nate seems to be fairly alone in not bowing before the altar of Whedon.
The wide success would indicate that this appealed to people outside of his fan base. So what is it about this movie that gets so many people? Does it earn its seat of power, towering over all others with the power of Asgard behind it?
Or should it be cast into the negative zone to be kept from wreaking havoc here on Earth? Keep listening, true believers.
The Chitauri are coming. Nothing will change that. What have I to fear?
The Avengers. That's what we call ourselves. Sort of like a team. Earth's mightiest heroes type thing.
Yes, I've met them.
Yeah. Takes us a while to get any traction, I'll give you that one. But let's do a head count here. Your brother, the demigod. A super soldier, a living legend who kind of lives up to the legend. A man with breathtaking anger management issues, a couple of master assassins, and you, big fella. You've managed to piss off every single one of them.
That was the plan.
Not a great plan. When they come...
That was Tony Stark still being charming and disarming, even when facing a demigod.
Right.
He
can do that.
He can.
He has that ability.
Yeah.
It's surprising that that's not just his superpower.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, Tony Stark technically doesn't have a superpower, but maybe his charm is his superpower. So
Part of it.
yeah,
One slice of the pie.
exactly.
Anyway.
Talking about the Avengers.
Is it Avengers or is it Marvel's The Avengers? I feel like we should probably say Marvel's The Avengers.
We should probably
every
say,
time.
well, here's the thing. We could say Marvel's The Avengers, or we could do, when they released it in England, to keep people from being confused with the classic English TV show.
Oh,
they
yeah.
called it Marvel's The Avengers Assemble.
Okay, we can do that if you
Okay.
want. So when was
I might just say both
can
the same time.
Yeah.
Like Marvel's The Avengers US, Marvel's The Avengers Assemble UK.
England, UK. Yeah.
So we're talking about Marvel's The Avengers US, Marvel's The Avengers Assemble UK. And Nate, let's talk about the first time you saw The Avengers.
Yeah, not much to say, really. I mean, I saw it in the theater when it came out. It was just, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
A little more than 2 years ago.
We were but children.
Yes, little lads. And I don't know. I was excited for it when I saw it. I hadn't seen all of the Marvel movies leading up to it that had been made, but I saw Iron Man. I can't remember if both of them had been made.
Yes.
Not the third one, but the first two.
Yes.
I'd seen Thor. Anyways, I was pretty excited about it, and had high hopes for it. I had never really been a huge. I wouldn't even say I wasn't a fan of Joss Whedon. I hadn't seen much of what he had done, so I didn't know much about that. But I knew that a lot of my friends and just people on the internet in general were just super pumped about this because Joss Whedon was involved in it. You know, I figured that this was at least going to be a well-made superhero movie, and I went and I saw it, and you know, it was. I liked it. I was fine with it, but I never really got why so many people thought it was just so spectacular, that it was just like the best superhero movie they'd ever seen, or one of the best blockbusters even they'd ever seen. I'd heard that a lot, and I just never really, I never really got that. I never really felt that coming out of it.
Now, why? So your excitement was pretty much residual. You were caught up in everybody else's excitement. Or you liked Iron Man enough that you were excited about it
I did like Iron Man, and I especially like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. I think it's just a ton of fun to watch him on the screen, and so I was excited to see that. And I'm also you look at the cast. I actually am a big Mark Ruffalo fan too. I thought it was going to be an interesting turn for him because where I was the biggest fan of his was in movies like You Can Count on Me. Totally different, you know. But I was excited to see what he would do with that, and even like Jeremy Renner, I like his work, and so I was excited about the cast, and you know, it did come out, I believe, in May.
Yeah, it wasn't early.
You know, that happens for me every year when May rolls around. Like I just get excited for whatever big thing the studios want to put out. You know,
yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, well, I was really excited. I really liked Iron Man. You know, I've read a lot of Marvel comics, and I had read Joss Whedon's The Astonishing X-Men, which is a really great comic book series. So yeah, I was excited. I had seen Firefly, I'd seen enough Joss Whedon to know that I liked him. I'm not, you know, I don't love everything he's ever done, and he can do no wrong. But I knew enough about his involvement in comic books and his style to know that I was probably going to enjoy it.
He was a good choice for this.
The perfect choice for it, I would say.
Yeah.
Even before I saw it, I thought he would be the perfect choice. And then seeing it, it lived up to every expectation I had, and I had really high expectations.
Yeah.
So,
and you were having expectations not just in the sense of the film, but from the comic book angle as well, which I didn't really have any of that.
Right. So for me, the reason I would rate it so highly is that it met and exceeded so many expectations I had, and I already had very high expectations, like I said. So it was a movie that got the heroes. It was a movie that was exciting. It was fun. It was funny. It was effective in its drama. I remember when I saw it, I don't know, I saw it with people who were excited to see it. So it was just, I was caught up in the whole thing. And yeah, I just thought it was really great.
Can you tell me what were those expectations, or even the opposite of that? What if in the hands of another director you would have been afraid to see with the Avengers?
Somebody who made the the explosions and the special effects take center stage. Somebody who was really like surface with the characters, that relied a lot on what had already been done in the Iron Man movies, Captain America, Thor, just rested on that and said like, ugh, you already like these people, so now watch them say other things.
Yeah.
I expected him to know the characters, to add to the characters, and he did. That was one thing that I was really excited about and then impressed with once I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it just, on top of that, and I'm not typically somebody who like will let the funness of a movie carry me, but the movie was just really fun. Let's talk then about what some of our listeners had to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, before we head into our rewatch, it would be good to, and I always like doing this on our website and on Facebook and Twitter, is to throw out the opportunity for listeners to weigh in, because it always, as we've said before, it always gives me things to look for and things to think about before or as I'm watching it the second time around.
Right. Yeah, I love it.
And we got a lot of good stuff this time, a lot of different things to think about. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll share from one listener, Eric, who talked about the movie in and of itself, and he was just kind of, I don't know how much he was into like the comic book aspect of it, but he felt like there were some things that were probably a little silly about the movie, like why the aircraft carrier had to be flying. I feel like there is a reason for that.
Do you?
I do.
All right, we're gonna have to get into that. Yeah.
And he kind of felt like it's just because it's a Marvel movie, whatever, it has to have an aircraft carrier that flies. It can't just be a regular aircraft carrier. But a regular aircraft carrier couldn't travel to other parts of the United States. It couldn't be over the city. There's a few reasons for that. And he agrees with you that Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man is awesome. Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, awesome. Chris Evans as Captain America, awesome. Now here's where we differ. He says Mark Ruffalo as Hulk equals fart sound.
Wow.
I don't know about that, but just being honest.
Also, I would be interested to hear what a Hulk fart would sound like.
I would not be interested to hear that.
Because in a movie, or
no, it would
kill
you. It would kill you.
Yeah.
It would kill you. A Hulk fart. And he also brought this up, which I didn't when which maybe proves his point. He said Stellan Skarsgård was totally wasted. When Wasted as a resource, he clarified, not that he meant he was drunk, but maybe he was drunk. But when I first watched it, I kind of forgot Stellan Skarsgård was in it, and that I agree watching it again. He's there in the beginning, he's there at the end, and then just doesn't really do much, and it's too bad because he's a really great actor.
Yeah. That is a good point. They really don't do a lot with that character.
No, they really don't.
Yeah.
And for an actor like him to just kind of fade away and to be forgotten, that is too bad.
Yeah.
But that was Eric commenting on the movie itself. You had some people comment on your Facebook about.
Well, as Whedon. I had said when that I had never really been all that familiar with Joss Whedon's work. And so I was really curious to know just what is it about Joss Whedon as a fan of comic books? What is it that we look for when we think of something Joss Whedon makes, or what is it that made him perfectly suited to this movie? And I got some great response. I mean, some lengthy response from people. I can't read.
Well, that just proves the Whedon fanship.
Yeah. I mean, it really well thought out stuff from listeners Chris and Alexander. I can't read them word for word, but just a few sort of highlights of what they were saying is basically that, what makes Whedon so great for this, for the Avengers movie, and also just as a filmmaker, writer, director in general. One of which is that he's just a legit comic book writer, hitting on what you were talking about. And how he basically now just works for Marvel even.
Yeah.
Which a lot of this stuff I had no clue about, Chris said things like he can create interesting deep villains that aren't mustache twirling wannabe alphas, which is interesting. Most importantly, he is not some Hollywood guy that takes on projects he doesn't know a thing about and runs superhero franchises into the ground. Able to invoke empathy from the audience for these characters by making them appear vulnerable despite their immense power and popularity. One thing I thought he said that was interesting was he said, keep in mind there were 5 movies leading up to the Avengers, and only one of them was really any good. I'll take a guess that maybe that was
talking
Iron
about
Man.
Iron Man?
Yeah. He elevated the entire genre to great heights with a single summer blockbuster so good it destroyed everyone's expectations of what a superhero movie could be and how much they could make.
Yeah.
And he did it by not selling out and not compromising on the script. So, yeah, I mean, I thought that's definitely a lot to think about. And he is basically insinuating that this is the best comic book movie he's seen.
Yeah, well, and he actually went on to make this is something I feel like I had heard, but I had forgotten, that Marvel was originally going to move forward with an entirely different script for the movie, and he told them to their faces that it was so bad that they should act like it had never existed. Like, he knew enough about it and was confident enough to say to Marvel, don't make this movie. This is awful. We need to restart it.
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of got the sense from even what Alexander was saying that the writing is such an important aspect of what makes a Joss Whedon film a Joss Whedon film. Alexander said things like he's a master of dialogue, and he is the primary writing credit on the Avengers. And to get the best out of Whedon as far as direction in a film goes, that he needs to have a hand in writing it. You can tell that a guy like Alexander is just a big Whedon fan. He says, in my estimation, everything Whedon touches turns to gold as far as writing goes.
Yeah, that's a pretty good inference.
Heck, he had a hand in writing the screenplay for Toy Story. Did not know that.
You didn't know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I don't know how I didn't know that, but I didn't. And he says potentially the most beloved animated film of our generation. I would not disagree with that. So, some really good points made about Joss Whedon, and I did take those with me as I rewatched this, and it was really good to hear that from our listeners. I really appreciated that. So.
Well, that's great. So did it affect your viewing this time? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about rewatching it. Did these help you enjoy it more? Were you watching for something different this time?
Was I looking for something different? I don't know. They were talking so much about Whedon's writing and his dialogue. So that was something I was definitely paying much more attention to this time as I was watching it, was just listening to the way the characters were interacting with each other, what they were saying, and also just the way that the movie moved as far as the plot and everything and where it was going. So it certainly was on my mind, and I was noticing some of these more Whedon trademarks that I have come to understand later. Earlier I was talking about the first time I had seen the Avengers. Well, since then I've seen things like Cabin in the Woods. I've given Firefly a shot. I didn't really stick with it, but he does write really fun, quippy, good dialogue, with characters, and maybe that's something I could appreciate a little bit more. Now, did you want me to talk about my general feeling for the movie as well on the second time, or did you have anything else to say about that?
No.
I think in general, though, I feel about the same watching it this time as I did the last time. I didn't dislike it. It was fine to watch. I don't feel like I needed to watch it again. I don't feel like I really got anything else out of it after a second viewing that I didn't get the first time around,
Yeah.
other than just, recognizing these things that Joss Whedon
Sure,
does
you were
and
maybe
appreciating
paying
them.
more attention to his thumbprint.
But as far as like just what I could take away from the movie or what the movie did for me on an even just an emotional or aesthetic level, it was the same as before.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference this time is that since then we've had a lot more superheroes movies and that have come out, and in general, I'm experiencing superhero fatigue. I'm getting to the point where I just don't care anymore. I watched the Age of Ultron trailer and it did nothing for me. No sense of excitement whatsoever. If I never see another superhero movie again in my life, or I shouldn't say that.
But yeah, whoa.
I shouldn't say
Careful.
that. I should say if I never see a Marvel superhero movie again in my life, I don't feel like I'm going to be missing much.
Can
to
I
be
ask
honest.
why specifically a Marvel superhero movie?
Yeah.
Can you
know,
answer that?
Yeah. At first, I thought I was alone, but I realized that I'm not alone because actually, the day after we had decided that we were going to be discussing the Avengers in our next episode,
Yeah.
Vox.com had an article by Todd Vanderwerf.
Love him.
Do you?
Yeah.
And the title of it was "Why I'm Dreading the New Slate of Superhero Movies." This was written October 29th, the day before, I guess, Marvel Studios had set release dates for a slew of movies that are going to be coming
they've got
out
like
through
a
2019.
real long-term plan.
Yeah, and there was an image making its way around the internet of just between DC and Marvel, a schedule of movies coming out through 2020. It's 19 films.
Between the
Superhero
two of them?
movies. Yeah, between the two of them, mostly Marvel.
Yeah.
And that's just starting 2016. That's not even including all that's coming out next year.
Yeah.
And so I realized I'm not alone in starting to see this trend of these movies just getting to be too much and getting to be what he called a list of chores. It's just another thing to have to try to check off the list. And the big problem being that while it's good that Marvel is basically making a huge, exciting TV show, is what he called it, that we tune into every few months, there's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
That's kind of new and interesting, but I guess like any other television show, if you're not a fan of the show,
Right.
you just don't get it, and you stop tuning in. Eventually, you do stop tuning in if it's something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess this is where I think his big point is, and I actually agree with this. And he was pulling a lot from another article that was written by Matt Zoller Seitz about more critiquing superhero movies in general. But to him, Marvel's never made a great movie.
Okay.
It's come close, both the first Avengers and the second Captain America, he argues. And this is where he put into such great words what ultimately I just find average about Marvel movies is they do tend to all follow these same formulas. Inevitably, the stories revert to the company here, as he's saying, which is interesting. Like, it's not really, there's an auteur almost feeling to Nolan's films, whereas Marvel does have a very company feel to these movies.
Yeah.
And he's saying that it basically reverts to three big fights faced with shallow character stories and snarky humor formula, and devolve into an ending where a bunch of things created in a computer hit each other with other things created in a computer.
Yeah,
I get tired of that. I don't know. I really do tire of that.
Here's what I see happening. I see it happening for good and for bad. Not necessarily bad, but just for good and for uninspired, maybe. Is that Marvel is doing with movies exactly what they did with comic books back in the 60s and 70s, and that is capitalizing on, a new thing, really striking while the iron's hot. When Marvel started, Stan Lee and the other people involved were really good at knowing what would sell and creating Spider-Man, creating Fantastic Four. It was very calculated, the way they produced those characters, the way they put them together, the way they marketed it, the way that they tied things together in a really great way. The Marvel universe became so intertwined that same with the DC universe, but they ended up having to kind of kill off a bunch of characters just so that they could clean house a little bit. And they had like just hundreds and hundreds of characters that were like with backstories and things that were getting so messy. So what I see them doing now is what they were doing when they started the comic book company, and that is really branding themselves. And their movies are their new comic books, where they've just got so much of it that it's going to get to the point where if you haven't been watching from the beginning, if you weren't watching from Iron Man, you're going to be kind of lost after a while. And so the movies are going to follow in the vein of comic books, where they're going to have their following and they're going to be, formulaic for a while. If you look at the early comic books from Marvel, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, X-Men, all these things, every issue is so repetitive in that, there's some conflict between the heroes, or like Spider-Man in his personal life, there's a conflict. While they're trying to deal with that, a villain comes in. They try to defeat the villain. It's the hardest villain they've ever met. They can't defeat him. They figure it out, and they defeat them. Their personal conflict is resolved. Like, it's so formulaic.
Right.
And that's what's happening with the movies. Eventually, with the comics, they made enough comics and they had enough creative people coming in that then things started breaking the mold, with X-Men Days of Future Past and Chris Claremont coming in and all these things, where new stuff started happening. And I do see Marvel getting stuck in that rut, but the fact that they've got this plan to bring things together, that they've got that they're staying ahead of it, that they're not just responding to what has been popular, that they're not going to be changing it like, oh, people really liked this dancing robot character, now we're going to add more of the dancing robot character, or whatever.
Sure. There hasn't been a Jar Jar Binks
Right.
of the Marvel universe.
Yeah, although Groot maybe is the Jar Jar Binks. But Groot's not that irritating. So what I think is going to happen is that they're going to go through this really kind of boring, staid phase where, oh, okay, we've seen this before. It's sort of, but what I hope happens, and the reason I say I don't think it's entirely a bad thing that there's going to be this fatigue, is that they're going to sink or swim. They're either going to drop the movie thing or they're going to get more innovative with it. So whatever, that's just what I see happening. That really has little to do with the Avengers. But I think that Marvel is doing with their movies what they did with their comic books.
Yeah.
And what they did with their TV shows too. I mean, if you remember in the 90s, Marvel was all over like the X-Men cartoon.
The cartoons, you mean?
Yeah. And Marvel is
the
just
Spider-Man
constantly
animated series,
right?
and, yeah.
They're constantly looking for ways to make money.
Yeah, and that's
no.
That's fine.
Yeah, I can see the cynicism in their grand plan, but I can also see the exciting possibilities.
Yeah,
for
you can see some potential that maybe
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing in it, or something that could be on the horizon that would bring someone like me into it and take away some of that, what you could call cynicism. But I guess where I find a big difference between, say, what they did with comic books and television and what they're doing with movies is, their comic book universe and that comic book empire didn't infringe upon the publishing industry as a whole. The publishers weren't releasing any less amount of books because of all this superhero stuff, which I'm just not into. There's such a diminishing number of new summer big budget blockbusters that don't have to do with superheroes. It seems like now it's not just that I'm bored of superhero movies. It's like I'm bored of what comes out every summer just because most of it's superhero movies. And this week, I just watched Edge of Tomorrow, or now they're calling it Live, Die, Repeat.
yeah.
Whatever. I really liked it.
Isn't that awesome?
It's a great movie.
Love that movie.
I really like that movie. But
right.
it made me miss, like, why can't more? And that movie didn't do very well at the box office. In fact, I think it did pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But that's a shame. And I think it's because all these superhero movies are just, they're eating up, and they're just kind of like swallowing the entire summer movie industry. The Marvel's partnering with the studios, Paramount, right? I mean, or at least Avengers is a Paramount movie. I don't know if they all are. Fox owns X-Men.
Fox owns X-Men, and Sony owns Spider-Man.
Yeah. So, it's not just like they're doing this big thing and it doesn't have any consequences for people who aren't into it. If I wasn't into it, but they wanted to continue to do this thing, and people who are fans of it could get really into it, that's fine. Like, I have no problem with it. And I do actually see the value in it. I think it's an interesting experiment. I do like to have this sort of ongoing serialized movie experience with a cast of characters that continues on, and the stories weave in and out of each other. I think that's an interesting thing to do. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's also kind of ruining what the studios put out every year.
I hear what you're saying. I hear that it could be, you know,
It's just because these have to be such big budget pictures,
I
and
get it.
studios throw all their weight behind these things.
I do get it. But you also sort of sound like a grump right now.
I know.
Like this is not, yeah. And I think as a comic book fan, I'm pretty excited by it because like the Avengers is as close as you're gonna get to like good comics on a movie. So many times, people have abandoned the comic book to make the movie.
Sure. And I never really did comic books much as a kid or even up till now. I read a lot of comics, but I actually tend to mostly stick to like graphic novels. I don't tend to read a lot of superhero comic books.
You forgot to push your glasses up on the bridge of your nose when you said that.
I prefer to call them graphic novels. But anyways, that's not something that I never really brought into those movies. And so a lot of times my favorite superhero movies were the ones that I would find out that comic book fans hated.
Marvel hasn't done everything right. I didn't really dig the Thor movies, but I've never really dug Thor as a character.
Yeah.
Right? So far, they haven't gotten Hulk totally right. I mean, Ang Lee did a really interesting thing with Hulk, I'd say. It was a total flop, but he made like a contemplative Hulk, which is actually pretty true to the comic books. Like Hulk is not just Hulk smash. Like, and you saw it better in the Avengers, where there's that real divide in Bruce Banner. Like, I don't like the Hulk.
Would you escort Dr. Banner back to his
Where? You rented my room.
The cell was just
In case you needed to kill me, but you can't. I know, I tried. I got low. I didn't see an end, so I put a bullet in my mouth, and the other guy spit it out. So I moved on. I focused on helping other people. I was good. Until you dragged me back into this freak show and put everyone here at risk. You want to know my secret, Agent Romanoff? You want to know how I stay calm?
I feel like that's what Mark Ruffalo brought to that character, is almost this melancholy to the Hulk. And I say that having not even seen the other Hulk movies,
the other
or
two.
Eric Bana or Edward Norton's performances.
Yeah.
But
I really did like Mark Ruffalo's performance, but I see what you're saying as far as movies.
I just think
Well, the thing is, it was happening. The blockbuster. This isn't new. This isn't since Iron Man that we've been saying that summer blockbusters are uninspired.
no, but they were at least new stories. Now, a lot of them weren't very good, and a lot of them really fell flat, and a lot of them were just kind of terrible. But they were new. Okay, so even if you take something like going back to, and I don't mean to get nostalgic here, but like Jurassic Park was like that was like a totally new thing.
But
It
that was still based on a book.
Yeah, that's fine, but it's one book. I mean, then they obviously, what they would always
Jurassic
do.
Park 4 is coming out.
What
Nate.
they would always do is drive the sequels into the ground, and obviously we have our own issues with that as well.
And now Marvel
but-
is elevating the sequels. I think that sequels in and of themselves aren't bad if it adds to it. And the Avengers added to the story, the characters of these, the stories of these characters in a way that made it necessary. And I trust Joss Whedon, and if he's going to be involved in the Marvel universe, movie-making universe, I trust Joss Whedon to try to do that with everything, that every movie that comes out is going to be necessary in some way. Guardians of the Galaxy, everybody loved. I thought it was fine. There were some good things about it. I thought that it was actually possibly unnecessary, but they did tie in some things with the Infinity Gauntlet and other things that you can see it. You can see its importance, and I think it'll be more important later. So I don't think that sequels or adaptations in and of themselves are bad.
No, I totally agree. I mean, it's not like sequels are bad in and of themselves, but you really think, I mean, see, you think that Marvel has elevated the sequels. I really feel like these movies, they feel so same to me. Like they don't...
Even the Avengers?
To a degree, yes. I feel like they give the directors or the writer of whatever happens to be the Marvel movie that you're watching, they give them a little bit of room to kind of express themselves within that.
Mm-hmm.
But even in, I do think it's with the Avengers because I feel like where Joss Whedon is really good, which is with dialogue, working with actors, that shines in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have like the same features in every Marvel movie. The action to me, it was too much action. Like I couldn't take it. I was bored. I was actually bored mostly by the action, and the action all looks the same in every single one of these movies. It almost seems like they're using the same special effects departments, and they're using like just the same things over and over again. I do agree with what, Matt Zoller Seats says. It's just things crashing into other things. I mean, it gets so boring to me. It was fine when I saw like Iron Man, because I think that was the first Marvel movie I saw. It was great. I loved it. But after, I think I haven't seen everything, but I've seen a good handful, 7 or 8 of these movies. I'm tired of it. It just all looks the same to me. And when I sit down to it now, I pretty much know what I'm getting into. I can kind of watch for interesting things in between the action. That's where the interesting things happen, where the directors actually kind of, you can see their characteristics bubble up a little bit. And then you get back to the action, and it's almost like everything pulls out and it's just Marvel again. It's just bang, bang, crash, crash, and it's all got that video game kind of look to it.
I can see that. I get where you're coming from, and because that's exactly how I feel about your beloved historic epics, that the action in that it doesn't hold me. And the action in this is fine. I don't know what it would take for me to be like excited about an action scene. I think
but you do. I mean, think about a movie like Inception, which has action in it, but is so thrilling to watch. And it's because it's smaller. Like Christopher Nolan knows how to do action in a way that's more interesting. Like he knows how to scale it back a little bit. Like, what's interesting in Inception is like this intercutting between like, you do have like the snowmobile chases and things like that, but it's intercut with like, a pretty much like a fight scene of something flipping, and it's not done with special effects and CGI.
Yeah.
And it just looks great. I mean, and it's so interesting to watch. It actually pulls you in instead of just kind of glossing over all of it. He elevates what you can do with an action movie in even a superhero movie. Like the action scenes, even in like Dark Knight, are really kind of, I mean, they're just more, they just kind of pull you in more. They're more interesting to watch than even the final 10, 15 minutes of the Avengers.
Yes. I mean, I would agree that Nolan is way more cinematic. Film.
It seems like the action is actually where the director needs to come through and be themselves. And it's like Marvel doesn't let them do that. I mean, even if you think about how the action works with, like when Spielberg does action, he does so much to build up everything leading up to the action.
Yeah, you can pick any movie and say, well, it's better than the Avengers. That's fine. They're doing different things.
Okay, but even as far as scale goes, like the last time I think I was impressed by scale, like just big. Last time I think that really impressed me was probably Lord of the Rings.
And didn't get old to you?
Lord of the Rings?
3 movie after movie, like I find... This is sacrilege. I find Lord of the Rings action scenes fine. Like, yeah, it's impressive. I just don't love action scenes. So for me, the Avengers, like the action scenes are action scenes. I'm not gonna fight for the value of the action scenes in Marvel. Like,
but don't you? There's so much of what makes that movie that movie. If they didn't pack it so much in,
the thing about the Avengers action scenes is that Whedon keeps the story going. The interactions between the characters are just as nuanced and vital. The relationship Captain America has with Iron Man is the same, and it's growing. They're not just like high-fiving and all of a sudden be like, we're cool. Like, there's still the tension.
Yeah.
There's still the relationship between Hawkeye and Black Widow. That's what I'm looking at, in that those action scenes are necessary, in that the characters and the story are moved through. It's not just... and then they fight, and then the story continues. The story is continuing through those action scenes. Whether or not that action scene is done like Christopher Nolan would do it, or done like Peter Jackson would do it, or done like Mel Gibson would do it makes no difference to me personally. What I cared about is, and this is where my like comic book stuff is, that would Hulk do that? Would Iron Man do that?
Yeah.
Would Captain America do that? And he totally nailed it. He
agree.
got those characters. The way they fight is part of their dialogue. It's part of their character. It's part of who they are. And so whether or not he spent too much time having cars explode, that makes no difference to
Well,
me.
you're making it sound like I just stack up action scenes and then evaluate whether or not the movie was good or not. I mean, what I'm saying is, and it is in the script, like there is a momentum not only to action scenes within themselves that should be in any movie to show that it's a good, well-made movie, but there should be even momentum as far as like how those action scenes are kind of dropped in the movie, and that they should even have some kind of an arc to them or some kind of a ramp up to them. Like,
Yeah. I
with
think in the Avengers it does.
no way. Within the first 10 minutes of that movie, you've got a building decimated, at least 6 or 7 people killed on screen, helicopters blowing up, a car chase with a crash. That's within the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah,
I
what's
was kinda
happening there, though?
That could have been the final scene.
You didn't pick up on the emotional impact of that? Like, of why that was important to the story? That whole thing with the Tesseract in the beginning, the way that Hawkeye got changed over, the way that it sets up the weaponry that S.H.I.E.L.D. was secretly making.
Yeah.
That, like, it demonstrated the power, one, of the Tesseract, and two, of what S.H.I.E.L.D. was had at hand and that they were hiding, that they had this thing that was able to just destroy things like this. It was. I mean, it wasn't just like kick off a guitar riff and now you're excited. Like, it was important to the story, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it worked as a setup, if that's what you mean. I mean, it did set up things. Like, I guess I'm not really saying that the action scene was in itself pointless. I'm just saying that, like, they could have had that same plot setup in an action scene that just kind of was a little bit toned down, so that later on, when you get to the other action scenes, you feel like, oh, here's more of the same. It's a rhythm thing. It just kind of feels like it shoots up, plateaus, and then just kind of stays that way. So that by the end, when you get to what should be, you know, the climactic scenes in the movie, they just fall really flat. I mean, I feel like at the very end of the movie, you know, it was late at night, so I'm not going to fully blame the movie, but I was like really kind of struggling to stay awake at the very end because nothing was really happening that was all that important. Now, I know it does live within this larger Marvel universe, so it's got to go on.
Yeah.
But the ending is pretty anticlimactic to the movie. Like Thor just kind of takes Loki. I mean, Loki's like the villain in the movie, and it just kind of ends with like, I guess take him away. I don't know, like nothing really happens. Like,
what? Yeah, I mean,
again, I
can't make you
like I hate this
rewrite
movie,
it, but I don't. I can see what you're saying. I just, for me, it's unfair to everything this movie is doing, everything that this movie has going right for it, to reduce it to its action scenes as though it were a Transformers or like a G.I. Joe.
No,
where there's
but the
literally
action scenes
nothing
are done the same
but-
way as those movies.
No, I mean, I would not say so. I think like Man of Steel and the Transformers movies is just so, it's like Power Rangers where the giant robots are fighting. Like the buildings are just complete. Like there's no, there's no concept of they're fighting in an actual space. Like they will level a city with no thought. The Avengers, everything that they were doing while they were fighting, not everything that all of them were doing, but what Captain America was doing, very true to his character, and what Iron Man had in mind, they were thinking of the people on the ground. They were saying, like, we've got to stop this because people are in danger. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just Iron Man was willing to, like, shoot through an entire building and use it to explode and kill those whale things. Like, they were trying to save people. They were trying to save lives and stop Loki from doing what he was doing. The action, whether or not it was big scale and they were crashing into things or whatever, there was still a purpose and a heart to what was happening.
I'll give you that, and I'll give you that the characters do interact more just in general during the action than they do in, say, like a Transformers. Or I didn't see Man of Steel, but I gotta imagine Zack Snyder. I've never been a fan of anything he's done. I hate 300. So I mean, I gotta imagine it's probably done a lot the same way. Yes. So, you know, I can
Very
at least, I will give Whedon and the Marvel movies in general that. I mean, I can appreciate it for that.
Generous.
Yeah.
Better than 300.
Yeah. Yeah. Put that on the DVD box if you want next time, Marvel. And there were little flourishes in there that don't quite, you know, that, I mean, I'm not giving it maybe as much credit as it deserves, as far as there were little flourishes in there. Like, you've got the Whedon sense of humor that kind of came in there once in a while.
Yeah.
That was fun.
You keep them off the streets. I need a perimeter as far back as 39th.
Why the hell should I take orders from you?
I need men in those buildings. Lead the people down and away from the streets. You got it. We're going to set up a perimeter all the way down at 39th Street.
Did you feel like you needed to see it a second time? Like, did you get something out of it this time that you didn't get before, as far as like the meaning behind it, or like what you took away from it, or?
No, not very much. What I would say is, and this is a pretty common thing in superhero movies, and especially in the Marvel universe. I noticed more. Whedon sort of explored more the idea that these are flawed people fighting for a flawed world, and like Loki really kind of speaks to that. He basically is like, what are you fighting for? Like, you're a piece of garbage fighting for a piece of garbage. Just hand it over to people who are better than you, gods who are better than you. And I really was moved actually this time by the it's simple, but the idea that like, yeah, it doesn't. I'm sorry. I'm flawed. I'm sorry. We're still going to fight for people. We're going to fight for ourselves. We're going to fight to do what's right. Even though Hulk's got this burden that he's carrying, and Iron Man is proud, and Captain America's disillusioned with what's going on in the world, and Black Widow and Hawkeye have this past that they're trying to escape. That there's still something that they're fighting for, and that's a pretty vague and not overly.
Well, and maybe that's just an inherent flaw that has to be there in a movie like the Avengers, which is just so big.
Yeah.
I feel like every time you got to a point where maybe they were going to explore an idea with a character, it's almost like they had to truncate it and then just figure, well, we'll do that in their full movie. When they talk so much, like with Captain America, they say things like, "Aren't the stars and stripes a little old fashioned?" And like just that whole idea of Captain America kind of standing for something that is an ideal that we almost find hokey. That's an interesting idea. They brought it up, and then they did a little bit with it. But then there was also like the stuff with every character had something like that, and maybe it was just almost too much, and you never really got to any real core because that's all in their individual movies.
Yeah.
And then so really for this particular movie, the core really does kind of become, the importance of working together, being flawed, the power of what you can get when you assemble, as it were.
Well, and that there's maybe a time for those things. There's a time for Iron Man's pragmatic approach. There's a time for Captain America's idealistic approach. There's a time for smashing. There's like,
right. They're all playing their part that was needed.
Yeah. And you're right. This is a setup movie. The sequel is going to be a setup movie. Comic books rarely have an ending. I mean, they're serials that they're just trying to go on forever, which is when they get muddled and they get boring and they get rebooted and they get...
The superhero movie that I love the most is The Dark Knight. I would put that way above this movie.
Yeah. Well,
but the reason, and
it's
that
also
really
a different kind of movie.
It is, and it's not part of this Marvel universe, and I understand all that. But I guess what I appreciated about that one was it worked on the entertaining, fun level, although it was very dark. And I'm not the kind of person that needs to have some kind of thesis to work out every time I walk out of the theater, but I do feel like I walked out of that movie really thinking about some different ideas. Nolan was throwing at you some very intricate, hard to grasp, wrestle with type of ideas in The Dark Knight. And I feel like there's places they could have done that in the Avengers, and they just never really did. It really did just kind of fall into, it's a fun movie, it's entertaining. If you need to get something out of it, I guess it's important to work together.
It wasn't thrown in. Well, come on. I think when Loki is talking to Tony Stark, that is a huge part of what this movie is about. Loki spends his whole time trying to bring out the worst in people. He counts on Hulk turning into Hulk. He counts on Black Widow being crippled by her guilt. He counts on Tony Stark's pride to make him ineffective. He counts on Captain America's disillusionment with what's happening in S.H.I.E.L.D. to melt him down so that he can't help. So it's not just working together. It's about not letting the worst of ourselves be who we are. That it's about overcoming those flaws in ourselves to fight for good, fight for the flawed people in our lives. It's not just teamwork and cooperation. And I don't think it's shoehorned in there. I think it's tied throughout the movie with Loki's really cynical view of humanity, saying, the ant has no concern for the boot or whatever. And I understand the compulsion to compare The Dark Knight with the Avengers and say that, but the Dark Knight's just so good, because The Dark Knight is just so good. The performances are amazing. The script is great. It's shot amazingly. It's got an appeal that is, in a way, broader than the Avengers. The Avengers went for the broad appeal by going big. The Dark Knight went for the broad appeal to the other people who don't like it going big. They go with the people who want that cinema, that film. Marvel is building it, and it's making it so that it really does help to see every movie. And the things that were laid in the Avengers are expanded in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and they're going to be expanded again based on all that in Age of Ultron. Like it's just kind of growing, and it's not feeling the need, I guess, at this point to make every movie its self-contained message or theme or story arc. And so if it's not something that's exciting you, then it's not something you're ever going to get into, just like comic books have always been sort of a niche thing.
Yeah, I guess I feel like it could, though. Like, I feel like if the movies had a little bit more character to them individually, it would be enough for me to keep wanting to go on. I don't know what I'm going to get out of Age of Ultron more than what I got out of the Avengers, which is just that it was fun, entertaining, and that's not going to last me through 19 movies over the next few years. You know what I mean? Like it's going to get, it's already to me getting a little bit old.
I mean, I guess we're going to, I did not expect us to disagree so much.
But I don't think, I mean, the big question, did you like this movie? Didn't you like this movie? The basic question, it's, again, I don't dislike this movie. I just don't think I'm getting as much out of it as what you get out of it. And I don't know if that really does have a lot to do with the comic book fandom aspect of it. If there does need to be a little bit of Comic-Con-ness to being willing to hang on to these for so long,
Yeah, it might be. I mean, because these are just characters that I am already invested in. Before this movie ever came out, I knew what I feel about Iron Man and Hulk and Thor and Captain America. I had feelings for these characters. I had thoughts about them. I've technically seen what happens before by reading the comics, because I know where they're going with this. So it might be that that not knowing the characters, it's possible to think too much about it, that to expect too much of it. But knowing the characters, it really adds to them. It really keeps in with that tradition of those characters. So
I guess that's just an expectation of film in general that I'm not really used to, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
I'll say it's a good thing in that I have expectations of adaptations that I feel might be different than typical. I don't, The Hunger Games is very true to the novel, but I don't think it was as successful as, say, talk about comparing apples to oranges, Never Let Me Go, which was more concerned with capturing the tone of the novel, the essence of the characters, the feeling.
It's a great movie.
It's an amazing movie, an amazing book.
Yeah. And they both did two very different things
with
the same exact story.
So for me, an adaptation that is in the spirit is way more effective than an adaptation that catches every plot point. Now, the stuff in the Avengers didn't happen exactly the way it happened in any comic book, but it was true to the characters. It was it kept in the spirit. So for me, that's why I like the Avengers so much. And I guess that means you have to be a fan at some level of the comic books to really see what the movie is doing.
Yeah, and I guess that's, to me, that's kind of that's a very different way to start thinking about film. I mean, to me, when you start thinking about talking about or discussing a certain film, you should be able to come into it fresh and talk about the merits of that film on its own. Like, if you haven't read the book, you should be able to watch a film adaptation of a book and decide.
You enjoyed this still.
I did.
I'm saying
you are able to bring out nuances in it that I can't because of being familiar with the comic book characters, but
I also think that Marvel is doing, I don't know, whatever. We don't need to keep talking about this.
Settle in, folks. It's going to be a long night.
We need more coffee. All right, so we're kind of at not a stalemate. We both like this movie.
And to
But
those
Nate
who
doesn't like it enough.
and to those who gave me reasons to appreciate the Joss Whedon aspects of it, they are there.
You think they were right?
I do, and
Okay.
I think they were right, and I think that and again, I mean, when the characters are having it out with each other or talking to each other, it's real. That's where the movie really excels, where it really does kind of shine. I think.
Does it make you want to watch other Joss Whedon?
I have, and
Yeah, but
I am
like-
not crazy
Okay.
about Joss Whedon.
Okay. That's a podcast for another time. Possibly.
It is
I'm not a huge Joss Whedon fan. Like I said,
It is a podcast. It's an entirely different podcast
Yeah.
because ultimately I appreciate what he does as his strengths, but that's about where it.
but you
ends.
see some flaws.
I do see flaws, but we don't need to talk about that in this
We don't.
podcast.
Oh boy.
That could, we
would
could be
take
going
a
all
lot.
night. Well, I think we've kind of bantered on here for long enough
yeah,
about
definitely.
superheroes, the Avengers, whatnot. So I'd love at this point to definitely hear what our listeners have to say about what we've said or their own thoughts about superhero movies, the Marvel Universe, all that kind of stuff. So if you're listening to this and there's something you just got to get off your chest that you can't believe we said or whatever, please just let us know. You know, we'll have a comment section on our episode, canwestillbefriends.net will be where that's at.
Yeah.
We will also have our
Facebook,
Facebook, our Twitter. We've got
email.
Yep, it's all there. Feedback at canwestillbefriends.net. That's the email address. And just in case you forget, there is always the hotline that you can call. Give us a call and leave a message so that we can hear your beautiful voices.
It's the most surefire way to get on our podcast is to leave us a message.
That's right. I can almost guarantee you'll be on it. So if you want to give us a call, though, the number is 847-306-9532. That's 847-306-9532 if you're writing it down. So, give us a call or however you feel like communicating with us. Just let us know what you're thinking and let us know if you've got other thoughts about the podcast or other movies that you'd like to hear us discuss.
Yeah, listener suggestions.
Yeah,
That's
it's about time we
something.
got some listener suggestions up in here.
Yeah. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
You got to meet us halfway.
That's or at least some of the way.
Well, since we've had no listener suggestions recently, although maybe we should go back and look at the list of listener suggestions we've had because the people who have suggested stuff are like, hey, wait a minute. We with winter coming and the temperatures dropping, we've
cold out
decided we're going to watch a movie that neither of us has ever seen before, but we've wanted to see. And that is The Ice Storm from 1997, directed by Ang Lee, starring Kevin Kline, Joan Allen, Sigourney Weaver, probably young Tobey Maguire, Christina Ricci, Elijah Wood.
They're all there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is kind of a selfish choice just because we're picking this just because it's something that we both wanted to see.
Yeah.
And we're both fans of Ang Lee.
And who doesn't love explorations of dysfunctional families in suburban Connecticut in the 70s?
I can't think of a better way I'd love to spend my evening.
No, I can't either. So it'll be The Ice Storm next time.
So please
if
watch
you've seen it, tell us what you thought about it.
Yeah.
If you like Ang Lee, whatever you want to say about your dysfunctional family, we'd love to hear your thoughts before we record the episode. So watch The Ice Storm with us. Comment on any of our websites about the Avengers, and thank you once again for listening.
Yes. Thanks as always. We'll see you next time.